bikinis on top. Whoa. True story, Katy Perry is a ghostwriter on all of my music. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to a very thrilling episode, a star-studded episode of Atheist Church Audit. My name is Jared, I'm an atheist, and this week I went to a church. This is a cool episode because Ruslan, the super big evangelical YouTuber, flew me out to California to have me on his Bless God podcast. We hung out all weekend, he took me to his church, and it was a really good time, and I really appreciate it. He's also a really good dad to his kids, and I think that's worth praising. Hey, Ruslan, permission to make the most unhinged, chaotic thumbnail imaginable.
Sure, bro.
What the fuck? Anyway, I need to start off this video by expressing my frustration with just how perfectly beautiful California is. I don't know how it's fair that so much of the nation's beauty is just consolidated into that tiny little region on the West Coast. And it pisses me off. Some would even say it's an argument against the existence of God. There's no way that a good God would so unequally distribute beauty in this great nation of ours. That's why I'm an atheist. There's no North Carolina Malibu. So yeah, I flew into San Diego on Saturday night, then woke up super early Sunday, and then on Monday, like an hour and a half before my plane was supposed to depart, Ruslan and I finished up our conversation on his podcast, and then he sprinted me to the airport. Thank God for TSA pre-check. It's good shit. Regarding the conversation that I had with Ruslan, it was like 2.5 hours, and I don't think I said anything too stupid. So Jared, do you have any weird hot takes?
Well, personally, I believe that Jesus was a space alien and the government's been trying to cover it up.
Anyway, that's not relevant. What is relevant is Ruslan's church. This was like the whole plan the whole time was for me to, go to his church before we did our little podcast together. And he told me over DMs like, hey man, my pastor's ready and excited for you. And I said, he's excited and ready for me? Like he's prepared? Well, then I'm gonna have to judge him twice as harshly. And even if I were to do that, I think Pastor Jeff would come out scot-free because he's a really good dude. Rhythm Church in Oceanside is a very interesting shindig. This is a very poppin' off evangelical church, very modern vibes. However, it meets in a renovated Episcopalian church. And that church was quite old, and it had some really old and really beautiful stained glass in it. And I think under some circumstances, I could look at this and kind of cringe or wince, but Ruslan explained some of the church's history and explained how the last church presumably got priced out of the area. And so it was either, this church was going to be demolished or a new church was going to take it over. Now, this isn't the first time that I've seen a modern church kind of overtake an older historical church. And I've seen it done well and very, very not well. And I've got to be honest, I think that this was one of the much better permutations of it, where it wasn't overshadowing the historical iconography everywhere and the beautiful stained glass, but it seemed to be trying to, revitalize it and blow a fresh breath of air into the whole thing. I remember vividly going to one older cathedral and they had straight up covered up the stained glass with the projector screens. Evil, diabolical, burn it all down. You don't deserve nice things. But this church was not doing that. Instead, it was being respectful of the believers who would come before them and who had, spent a lot of time and energy building something beautiful unto the Lord. It seemed like they were being good stewards of that space. What do you think?
What do I think?
What do you think?
Oh, this is my home, bro. I love it. I love all the people. Super nice. I can't wait for you to see the inside.
I'm stoked. And outside of the church, right beside the bounce house, there was this like giant 30-foot Asherah pole, and there was probably like 24 crows circling around it, and they were all like squawking, "We're the sons of Beelzebub!" Bah, bah, bah. It was kind of random. I'm kidding. I've already decided this is going to be the bit for this video, so stick around because I'm going to do this 2 or 3 more times. Yeah, I've got to be honest here, and I have to show my bias that I don't tend to like, pardon my French, but trendy churches like this. This was very hip, it was very cool. The pastor wasn't wearing a suit; he was wearing like a sleeveless jacket, like a vest, like a cool guy vest. And that just tends to not be my flavor. But I want to stress that this seemed like one of the best permutations of this genre of church that I've seen. Just to kind of stress this point of like the type and style of church that this was, outside they had like an inflatable bounce house for the kids. And normally I would kind of like wince and kind of roll my eyes at something like that. But at the same time, seeing how many kids were utilizing it and how little tiny human friendships were being made with something like that, I'll give it a pass. I'm not gonna let the old curmudgeon-y cynic in me ruin this one. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's like the size of this church, or more specifically, the size of the services where a function like this can actually work. Because I've seen, at huge mega churches where they have coffee shops and blah, 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 and it doesn't really facilitate community. It just makes everything more cushiony and comfy. Whereas I think this actually did serve to, develop community here. So I walk inside with Ruslan and we took the front seat, baby. Look at that pretentious, pensive motherfucker. So overall, I really liked this church. However, there were like several times where Pastor Jeff got up and started slamming the pulpit and said, "I want the Gospel of Judas in the canon." And that was kind of weird. Kidding, that didn't happen, God. So yeah, Ruslan and I walk inside and we enjoy a very beautiful worship session. Stupid, talented musicians, very lovely music. If I can be a little critical though, the lyrics are never, in churches like this, they're never as deep as I want them to be. They're never as deep as I think they should be. If you ever find yourself in a worship service and you're wondering, I wonder if Jared would like this or not, there's a telltale sign. I'm gonna tell you my litmus test. If you hear a phrase involving the word worthy more than twice, red flag. Not good lyrics. Not good lyricism. I'm sorry. It's just not good lyricism. Or like when the song is just singing about the name of God and how great the name of God is, and we lift the name higher, that doesn't mean anything to you guys anymore. It's just kind of like sweet nothings. Your music should illustrate that whole concept. You should have an entire song about the name of God and how name is interwoven throughout scripture. And you should have some big theological point about names. The song should be a sermon in itself. But almost certainly this church did not write these songs. If they did, I am so sorry. Oh my God, I am so sorry. My bad. But no, they probably got it from Hillsong. So the worship team was super talented. The music was really good. About halfway through the worship service, I look over to Ruslan though, and he's actually like taken a small child and is actively sacrificing it to Baal. I'm kidding. That didn't happen. God. You're just like nodding your head. You're like, yeah, that happened. Idiot. So the vibes were high here. The people here seemed to really like each other. And it did seem to be like a family atmosphere. Like it was just positive. It didn't seem like the kids were kicking and screaming, being dragged to church here. It seemed like they were happy to be there. Pastor Jeff gets up and gives a sermon. But before that, he and his wife give the announcements. Now, I want to both praise and lightly tease the pastor and his wife for what was about to transpire. There is kind of this meme in evangelical circles of the pastor getting up on stage and being like, "And that lady in the back, that's my smoking hot wife." And he did that. And here's what I think. I have no doubt in my mind that this pastor loves the shit out of his wife. And it was so genuine. And I think that if you don't come from a background of seeing a healthy marriage and seeing, like a husband flirting with his wife after 20 years of marriage, I think you need to see stuff like that. I'm a very big fan of PDA. Very big fan. And just because there's kind of a silly stereotype of this happening, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. I think when it is bad is when it feels performative or when it feels like a show and you can tell that it feels really disingenuous. But because of how small these service sizes are, it's about 300 people per service. I think that it just came across as like really authentic. Like they were flirting on stage and they were telling each other they loved each other on stage. They kissed on stage. And I can understand how some people would be really taken aback by that. Especially if you come from a more conservative background, that might be like ghastly to you. But for people who come from broken or abusive households, people who have never seen a husband properly flirt with his wife, I think that this is actually really healthy. Not in every context, but here, isolated at this church, it actually seemed kind of beautiful. So they're going through their announcements, the two of them on stage together, and then at some point, the wife, the pastor's wife, Erin, she takes the microphone and starts sharing something from the heart. Now, I've got to be honest, I really went back and forth in my mind of like, well, is it fair for me to bring this up in a video? I'm not sure, because I don't want to like embarrass, this really lovely pastor couple that I met and had the privilege of hanging out with for a while. But then at the same time, she addressed it to the church, and she mentioned, she felt like God told her to say this to everyone. And I've got to play Christian's advocate here and say something like, well, if the Lord told her to do this, then he also knew providentially that I was going to be here. So that's my thought process, and we're moving forward. Erin stands on stage and gets really vulnerable and says that she felt an inkling from the Lord to tell everyone that she has really bad social anxiety. And then she gets choked up and she confesses to the congregation. She says, hey, for a long time, I was actively taking a shot before every social function. And she just kind of admits that she was downing a couple of ounces of Jameson before whatever meetings she had. And she wasn't really like confessing this to the congregation and asking for their forgiveness, but instead, she was being vulnerable and then said, but God convicted me of this and told me, hey, you're not relying on my grace and my strength, you're relying on alcohol. And then she said that she's, stopped that habit and God's given her the grace to turn over a new leaf and press on without that vice. So I kind of want to speak out of both sides of my mouth here. I want to be really charitable to Erin here because I think it took some real courage to do what she did. And I know very well that feeling of feeling like the Holy Spirit is telling you to do something and you do it in faith. And that's super commendable. It takes a lot of courage. And I even want to go so far as to allow for the possibility that maybe this was the Holy Spirit genuinely telling her to do this, while at the same time humbly recommending that this probably should not be the protocol. I think that there was a huge emphasis there at the church that was prioritizing, being honest and being real with people and not, putting on a face and putting on a front, but instead just being straight up. This is something that I'm kind of torn on and something that I'm still developing an opinion on, because I've seen the worst of both sides of this, right? Where people are so closed off and not honest with each other, and then they're way too brutally honest with each other, and counterintuitively, it makes community really difficult. So I can point to churches that I've been to where the people are so shallow and the depth is, just like a mud puddle, and you never get to see anybody's true self, what they're passionate about, what they're afraid of, what they love, what they hate. And so that drives me crazy. On the flip side, Fire School of Ministry. You remember how I went there? Community was next to impossible there. And for a very counterintuitive reason. We were too vulnerable with each other. While we were there, I remember, our inauguration service where we went up to the mountains for several days of prayer and fasting and worship and sermons and stuff. And you're surrounded by your new classmates and you're so excited to meet them, and you run up to them and it's like, oh my gosh, how are you? What's your name? Blah, blah, blah. And the conversations invariably went way too deep, way too quick. I remember sitting in the cafeteria across from this kid and I was like, hey, Jimbo. And he sits across from me and he's like, Jared, tell me about your passion. What is your mission in life? Who are you? There were several times at the seminary where you would meet somebody new and they would be like, well, hi, my name is John and I come from a Christian background. My parents are missionaries, but I didn't receive the Lord until I was 16. And I had a long addiction to pornography. The dark stuff, BDSM, that was like Sesame Street compared to the depravity that I was into. And it's weird trying to foster a normal, healthy relationship with a person after that. It's kind of like being friends with your therapist, or even better, it's like being friends with your proctologist. It feels weird. Now, I'm not saying don't be vulnerable with the people you love. I think you absolutely need to be vulnerable with the people you love. However, that takes time to develop. And if I'm honest, I think that one of the most harmful recommendations that I've seen from people trying to, tell people to make friends is to go and be super duper vulnerable. And some people will misinterpret that to mean, oh, I need to go and spill my guts to everyone right then and there. And I've seen some people just ruin their chances at developing a healthy friendship with people because they did something like this. So I want to stress that I think as a whole, on average, I think that this needs to be done with an insane amount of caution. And yet, I think this was good. I don't think that this should be prescriptive. I don't think that this should be the norm, but I did see, somebody genuinely walk up to her afterwards and say, hey, I've been doing that for the longest time too. Thank you so much for being honest and transparent with everyone. And I think that that may have made a genuine difference in that man's life. And again, to Pastor Jeff's credit, I vividly recall him. We hung out after the service, and he did mention explicitly, being vulnerable with people while not bleeding on people, I think was the phrase that he used. Being honest and transparent and vulnerable with people, but not, puking your guts on them. Thank goodness I've never done that. I would never do that. This isn't like an emotional OnlyFans or anything that you've signed up for. So Pastor Jeff's sermon was really good. It was all about being the church and not just going to church. He was drawing a lot from Acts chapter 2, and the whole message of the sermon was kind of about being there for one another and building disciples. Go and build the church and build the kingdom, and the kingdom is supposed to be a community of people who are there for each other. And I want to try to tread lightly. And again, I want to kind of, admonish this church for a lot of the things that they were doing well, while at the same time questioning this strand of Christianity and this stream of evangelicalism. It seemed like the climax of the service, and maybe even the whole point of this community, was to be a community to each other. And they would almost certainly say, no, being a community is important, but it comes second to worshiping God. And fair enough. But somehow it feels like there's a limitation in their theological arsenal that kind of forces the community element to be the main thing. Like one of the big plugs at the end was, hey, you need to go join a rhythm group, one of their trademarked small group things. Fire group, a burn group, a cult group, not that. Oh gosh. And I think the reason why I'm kind of even bringing this up is because I'm looking at all of this and I'm wondering, what is being done here that can't be done at home? And I think that all of it seems like the kind of thing that can be done at home, maybe even should be done at home, and can be done at home better than can be done here, with the exception of the element of community. Like Pastor Jeff is a really good speaker and he's a really good orator. But, let's be honest, I could go home and I could crack open a few commentaries and I could probably, do a super duper deep dive in some obscure topic that interests me, and I would learn a lot from it. Arguably more than I would a sermon. I could probably hide myself in my prayer closet for an hour and have maybe even a more meaningful time in prayer and worship there than I could here in this service. I'm probably not going to stay at home and, have 300 people shoulder to shoulder with me. So the community element really is a big deal. The opportunity to be vulnerable with people and to do life together. I hate that phrase. I think that that's really important and good. And I think that they're doing a really good job of that here. But I'm not gonna lie, I've gotten at least a little bit weary of church where the centerpiece is a dude on stage talking. And again, the dude on stage here talking was saying really good things. But for both, the Catholics and the Orthodox, for what it's worth, their whole reason to come into church is primarily to celebrate the Eucharist and to partake of the Eucharist. And that isn't something that can be done at home. And to be fair to them, I think that Orthodox and Catholic churches often don't have this level of community and fellowship among people. Orthodoxy probably does right now more than the average Catholic parish, because Orthodoxy is experiencing a boom among young people. So in addition to that, it just feels like the Catholics and the Orthodox, they have other things that would draw you to church other than just the community element. They also have the icons. They also have the, cool incense or whatever that, you probably don't have back at home. And I don't necessarily think that all of that is better than what's being done here. It's just different. And so, kind of acknowledging the pros and cons of this stream, acknowledging kind of the intrinsic limitations of this strand of Christianity, I think is really important and valuable. So now let me kind of adjust to a slight critique that I feel is specific to this strand of Christianity. Pastor Jeff emphasized being real, being vulnerable, being transparent. And there's two things there that I think can leave the average person wanting. I think that when the messaging is, hey, we're all just broken sinners here by God's grace, trying to live life and do a little bit better and study his word together. It almost feels like there's not somebody at the top who's calling you to be better. Like there's not somebody who's set apart to be an inspiration to you, to be, a pastoral figure, which is ironic because I think Pastor Jeff is a super pastoral guy. And I can't believe that I'm saying this, but I think as I've gotten older, I think that I see it as more problematic when there isn't a distinctive line between clergy and laity. Again, controversial, and I'm willing to be taken to task for this one. But I can recall very vividly when I was in high school and I was the chaplain. And for those of you who are in ministry, you know this to be true. It just feels different hanging out with your flock, so to speak. Now, I wasn't a pastor of my classmates by any means, but at the same time, these were people that I preached to. I treated them like I was somebody who had a vested interest in their spirituality. And it just kind of feels different when you take on a responsibility like that. And there were definitely times where I would try to buck against that and be like, no, guys, I'm just like y'all. I'm just a regular classmate. I'm just one of the boys. And it just never felt that way. There was a distinctive shift between my junior year when I wasn't the chaplain and my senior year when I was. And I think that the position of pastor should be held to a really high standard. And I think of pastors primarily as people who should be physicians to the souls of their parishioners. And unanimously, one of my biggest criticisms for Protestants is that a lot of them are primarily preachers rather than ministers to souls. I get it, Mr. Local Baptist, Pentecostal, Presbyterian, whoever. You've got some incredible knowledge that you're really eager to pass on to your parishioners, and you're going to spend 4 hours parsing through Galatians and going through the Greek. And I hate to tell you this, man. No one cares. I can think back to the church that I went to as a kid, and I can't recall a single sermon that my pastor preached. I was there for years. What I do recall is that one Sunday he invited me over to the parsonage, and we talked about what was on my heart and what I was going through, my family life, and I will always remember that because he was being a pastor to me. I recently met with a group of United Methodist ministers, and they were picking my brain, asking for my personal recommendation from their favorite church sommelier. And unanimously, my advice was spend less time on sermon prep, spend more time with your parishioners. Be available to them. Be somebody who is approachable. Be somebody that they can go to when they have theological questions, when they have personal questions. Because if they've seen you preach 1,000 sermons from the pulpit, but they've never felt the warmth of your hand on their back as you're praying for them, there's a problem. But going back to this idea of kind of this separation from the clergy, I went and smoked hookah with an Orthodox priest this week. I kid you not, this is so real. In the past week, I have smoked hookah with an Orthodox priest. I smoked a pipe with a Presbyterian minister. And then this week, I smoked cigars with Pastor Jeff. I honestly didn't think that doing theology would be the thing to do a number on my lungs, but here we are. This Orthodox priest, as we were talking, he said something like, I really hope that I can be your friend, and I feel permission to do so because you're not in my parish. And I thought that's really interesting and really prudent because it's just a different kind of relationship that you ought to have with your parishioners. And so the dance that's being done here, I think is really interesting. And it's currently striking a really unique line where I think it is being super honest and super transparent and super vulnerable. And I'm super duper glad that this community has a place where they can be that with each other. I'm thrilled that these people have somebody like them that they can go and talk to, that they can go and pray with. So I don't really know what my takeaway here is because I'm definitely not criticizing this church. I think that they're doing a lot of things really, really well. And I think Pastor Jeff and Aaron are freaking fantastic. And I'm really glad that this, surfer California community has somebody like them that they can look up to. But I think that's maybe part of my question. Maybe that's part of the asterisk that I'm kind of getting at, is that the dynamic here doesn't necessarily feel like the pastor is above the congregants. And that seems like it has pros and cons, right? On the pro side, I think that it makes this place next to impossible to become culty. When there's a very clear delineation between clergy and laity, then it makes it easier for the clergy, presumably, to like enforce rules and strict regulations on the laity. But when the clergy and the laity are all friends, it seems like they're all, in this spiritual journey together. But I'm looking for language to describe this. It almost feels like it runs the risk of feeling like a Bible study where everyone is equal and everyone's input is totally valid, rather than having like a spiritual elder that you're, moving towards. Now, that can be a really bad thing because it opens the door for spiritual abuse and very bad power dynamics. But I think, I could be wrong, I think that assuming it's done well, if you don't have it, it feels like you're missing something. And I don't really know what my recommendation to this church would be. I don't think that I would say like, oh man, I want Pastor Jeff to tomorrow don a cassock and, not be on the same wavelength with his parishioners or suddenly feel like above them. That feels icky. That doesn't seem right. I think, maybe it's just acknowledging the intrinsic limitations and intrinsic strengths of a church like this, and then, you as a believer deciding if that's what you want and need in this season of your life or whether it's not. So yeah, I don't know. I'm an idiot. I don't know what's going on. What day is it? Where am I? Who the fuck is Bill Clinton? Also, one other thing I do have to mention. On Ruslan's podcast, he asked me if I would ever date a Christian girl. And I said, maybe, it depends. And then he said, well, would you ever date a girl from my church? And I told him no. And the reason that I gave was like, yeah, I'd probably have some like core beliefs that were pretty incompatible. What I should have said is no, I would never date a woman here because they are all out of my league. Why is everyone in California so pretty? It's disgusting. Men, women, everyone. Just stop it. So that was Rhythm Church. And I had a really great time. To Pastor Jeff and Aaron, thank you so much. And I really appreciate y'all and hope y'all are thriving. One last thing though, at the end of the service, I looked over to Ruslan and he was praying the Shahada and he was writing on a piece of paper a fatwa to Gavin Ortland. Super random. Don't know what that was about. I'm kidding. I think I'm funny. I think I am so damn funny. So, wow, that was loud. My name is Jared. I'm an atheist. Go to church.